I've flipped through a few of the Florida statutes and laws, and I did not see a code for having an attitude. And that's pretty much what this boils down to. If Bautista could have wrote Mr. Hill an attitude ticket, he would have, but it is not against the law to have an attitude with officers, with anybody, nor is it illegal or a violation to request that they don't touch your personal property. Greetings, I'm Tieesha, back with another video. We're going to talk about the traffic stop involving Miami-Dade motorcycle unit, which some might say was a motorcycle gang. We'll talk about that later. And Mr. Tyreek Hill. I don't follow NFL. I really don't. I initially saw the video and I'm like, want to know what led up to the circumstances of these officers removing Mr. Hill from his vehicle. I went ahead and watched the entire body cam footage. We're going to go through that together. And this piqued my interest being a former police officer. Also, I spent a lot of that time in patrol. So traffic stops is something that I'm very familiar with. I have a lot of experience in traffic stops. This one was quite interesting. There are two motorcycle units here. They're facing the direction that Mr. Hill's going to come from. Now, it's speculated that there were other officers who radioed out Mr. Hill's general direction, which would explain why this officer puts on his helmet right in time for Mr. Hill's vehicle to come into frame, and he began to initiate the traffic stop. So that seems reasonable. That also, too, they heard Mr. Hill's car before they saw it, but let's just go ahead and get it out there. This is easy to articulate, the careless driving, which could potentially have been reckless driving. I think officers will usually write you for careless driving so that you can prepay it so that you don't, face stiffer penalties with a reckless driving. And they could easily articulate that because that is a construction zone. If you go a few frames back, you'll see that there was pedestrians in the roadway, whether they were directing traffic or what, but they were in the fluorescent shirts. Officer couldn't articulate his speed because the officer's eyeballs aren't calibrated to measure speed, and he didn't have enough distance to, track Mr. Hill's speed by pace. This could definitely be articulated as reckless driving because he was traveling faster than all the other cars in the area. So this is easy to articulate a reckless driving, and I think the judge is going to see that and know that, when officers write careless driving, they usually cut them a break from a reckless driving. So the seatbelt issue, as you saw, Mr. Hill presented his driver's license immediately, as the officer came up. After the stop, he saw it, which is reasonable to retrieve his wallet out of his pocket. So I don't know how far that summons is going to go. Now, the rest of this coming up, let's talk about that.
Why don't you have your seatbelt on?
Don't knock on my window.
Why don't you have your seatbelt on?
Knock on my window like that, no.
And let's talk about that really quick. In the state of Florida, the seatbelt violation is Florida Code 316.614. If you look further under this statute, under Number 9, each law enforcement agency in this state shall adopt departmental policies to prohibit the practice of racial profiling. When a law enforcement officer issues a citation for a violation of this section, the law enforcement officer must record the race and ethnicity of the violator. All law enforcement agencies must maintain such information and forward the information to the department in a form and manner determined by the department. The department shall collect this information by jurisdiction and annually report the data to the governor, the president of the Senate, and the speaker of the House of Representatives. The report must show separate statewide totals for the state's county sheriffs and municipal law enforcement agencies, state law enforcement agencies, and state university law enforcement agencies. Officer Bautista makes a demand that Mr. Hill keeps his window down.
Keep it down. Hey! Keep your window down.
Officer Bautista has already seen the inside of Mr. Hill's car. He sees that Mr. Hill's the only passenger. Also, he knows who Mr. Hill is. He has his identification card. So what other threats do you perceive? Florida is one of those states that has some of the most darkest window tint. But right here, we can clearly see inside that we can see Mr. Hill. You see him right there. You can see his body. You see his t-shirt. You see his jewelry. You can see inside the vehicle. So what threats were there for the officer to make this request? This was just a battle of the attitudes. The officer should have reduced his attitude prior to making contact with Mr. Hill, and it's probably what would have gone a lot better.
Hey, keep your window down. Keep your window down. I'm gonna get you out of the car. As a matter of fact, get out of the car.
Give me that.
Get out of the car.
Give me that. I'm gonna break that freaking window.
Get out of the car.
I'm finna get out.
Get out of the car right now. We're not playing this game. Get out.
Get out. Get out. Get out. Get out. Get out. Get out. Damn. What part of blood are you doing this time? Hey, Drew, I'm getting arrested, dude.
Doesn't it make more sense to leave the occupant in the vehicle and they're contained versus taking them out and now you got to deal with them? This is a motorcycle patrol, so they don't have a vehicle, to work around. He's going to be standing outside of the vehicle doing what he has to do, looking up driver history, whatever. It would have been a better idea to keep the driver in the vehicle. Why take them out? Because now you have to do other stuff. From my experience, my training and experience, there was no reason to bring Mr. Hill out of the car. He wasn't hiding his hands. He was just frustrated. And, and that's what happens. Police do not make contact with people at their best times. But being a professional, Bautista and Torres should have exercised better professionalism toward a citizen of that city, a citizen they came in contact with, because this should not have went that far. But you want him out because you want to have a pissing contest. And that's what it was. Primary officer has stepped back. Like, look, yeah, I've said some words, but then I got Torres hopping in, who actually goes hand on, who further touches Mr. Hill's car, then goes to forcibly remove him from his vehicle without any real facts to articulate this. And so you see, he goes in, pulls Mr. Hill by his left arm, grabs him by his hair, behind the head, and then take him to the ground. This is one thing that pisses me off, because I absolutely hated our training days where we did high risk stops and, different types of arrests where we, handcuff standing up, handcuff from the kneeling, handcuff from a prone position. Absolutely hated those times. The ground is nasty. I'm not going face down on the ground. I don't even sleep on my belly. But to be put down on the hot Florida pavement, like this is just ridiculous. And I wish that more was done to discipline officers who try to, humiliate citizens in this manner. I think Mr. Hill is not resisting. He's not attempting to flee, nothing. Now, one thing I want to bring up when it comes to motorcycle units is that motorcycle units, their primary job is traffic. They're on the traffic side of the house. They usually do not respond to domestics or, robberies unless they're immediately in the area, but their primary job is traffic duties, issuing citations, investigating crashes, stuff like that, traffic control, stuff like that. So there's really no reason for these officers to, be this way when their primary job is to deal with drivers all hours of the day and stuff like that. So this type of customer service, is really lacking on this department. Mr. Hill's attorney, Mr. Julius Collins, stated, "We're in opinion that the officer's use of force was excessive, escalating, and reckless." And Danny Torres, he's been in law enforcement way before the whole de-escalation, term is being thrown around. He was in when it was verbal judo. So many people don't talk about that, but before this whole de-escalation, verbal judo was the thing. Further along in this article, the Miami Herald reports that Torres is a part-time DJ and a motorcycle club member. And that's where things get interesting, because they said that Torres goes by the name DJ DNO. I don't know what the DNO stands for. It might be an acronym. If y'all know, let me know in the comments, okay? So he also works nightclubs, and nightclubs is something that's also frequented by motorcycle club. You can start piecing a puzzle together of Torres being so heavily tattooed. Nightclubs, DJing, motorcycle clubs, and it even says at one point in time, Torres was the Florida chapter president of the Gunfighters Motorcycle Club. His Facebook page shows this is an international club, according to his website, is made up of active and retired law enforcement who are in good standing with their agencies. So, although Torres has this long history of being disciplined on his agency, he's still considered good standing. This article here by NBC News, and it states that the lines blur between cops and bikers across the country. The undercover NYPD detective now charged with taking part in a bike gang's assault on an SUV is not the only police officer who may have crossed the line between cop and biker. Across the country, say experts, that line has grown blurry as the number of active police officers joining and forming motorcycle clubs have soared. Within the last 10 or 12 years, there has been an explosion. These clubs of law enforcement, firefighters, and military, says Terry Katz, a retired lieutenant of the Maryland State Police who is vice president of the International Outlaw Motorcycle Gang Investigators Association. So, according to Katz, he states that it doesn't help that many of the law enforcement motorcycle clubs model themselves on outlaw gangs like the Hells Angels and the Warlocks. They wear the same kind of patches, ride the same bikes, and sometimes break the same laws. You can't act like something and not become it, says Katz, who spent 3 decades investigating bike gangs. You can't be a biker by night and a cop by day. Another incident in Baltimore in 2008, 65-year-old Norman Stamp, a 44-year veteran of the city's police force, was drinking in a strip joint with fellow members of the bike club he helped found, the Chosen Sons, when a brawl started in the street outside. Police said Stamp, off duty and dressed in his Chosen Sons gear, rushed into the fray with brass knuckles. The on-duty city cop, John Torres, who had been called to the scene to break up the fight, used a taser on him. When Stamp on the ground allegedly reached for his service weapon, Torres shot him. Stamp identified himself as an officer as he lay dying on the street. Stamp's widow brought a wrongful death against Torres in 2010, but he was cleared. And that goes to talk about an incident in Seattle. You have a number of other incidents, but these biker gangs and these motorcycle clubs and law enforcement and firefighters and military, this is something that cannot be ignored. I'm not saying that anything with, Bautista and Torres and arresting them, I'm not saying nothing. I don't know. I'm just saying, it just happens to raise an eyebrow and, we need to look more into this. Okay. But yeah, we talked about the careless drive. Interested to see how the officer testifies to that and see how that works itself out. And it's now up to the judge. As we saw in the video, the initiating officer, Bautista, he stepped back and everybody else, dived in on Mr. Hill initially. I think once the supervisor showed up on scene and asked Bautista, what do you have? I think that because the officers had already went hands-on with Mr. Hill, someone who was very high profile, they had to issue him a summons. And that's something from my experience, I've seen happen. It's like, hey, once you go hands-on, what do you have? Either you make the arrest, you issue the summons, whatever. You just can't let them go on a warning after that. I've witnessed that. I've flipped through a few of the Florida statutes and laws, and I did not see a code for having an attitude. And that's pretty much what this boils down to. If Bautista could have wrote Mr. Hill an attitude ticket, he would have, but it is not against the law to have an attitude with officers, with anybody, nor is it illegal or a violation to request that they don't touch your personal property, So that's all I have. I'll see y'all in the next video.